समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Most people who've commented on the tragic death of Ajit Pawar in a Learjet crash have focused on certain things. Apart from the fact that he was a great leader and they're very sad, people have talked about the NCP. Was the NCP reuniting? Was Ajit Pawar reuniting with Sharad Pawar, his uncle, whom he had left, stroke betrayed, depending on your perspective, to link up with the BJP? Or was the NCP itself going to join up with the NDA, the BJP alliance? Would Ajit Pawar have played a larger role on this? I mean, all of this is valid, and I understand why people are speculating. But what struck me most about the whole thing was, yes, sure, politicians will do things, we will speculate, we will plan, but ultimately it's not politicians who decide. It's not even us commentators who make any difference. All that matters finally when it comes to Indian politics is fate. In all the assessments and all the analysis I read about Ajit Pawar and his likely course of action, did anyone even consider that there would be a sad air crash and that he would be removed from the scene? Ultimately, what it shows us is that we can plan, we can plot, we can analyze, but the final call is not in our hands. It's in the hands of God, if you believe in Him, or in the hands of fate. It's an interesting lesson because it's one that we forget. We forget that so much of what we think of as reasonable developments in Indian politics today are actually all about fate. Let's take the prime ministership. I think that's probably the most obvious example. Indira Gandhi was assassinated in 1984. If she hadn't been assassinated, would she have been re-elected in the general election that was due in a few months? There'd been many assembly elections before in such states as Karnataka and Andhra that the Congress had lost. There was a lot of speculation that she would lose her majority at the forthcoming general election, that the Congress might lose power. None of that actually amounted to anything because she was assassinated. There was a sympathy wave, and the Congress was re-elected with a huge, the largest majority, in fact, in history, a huge margin. But it could have gone otherwise. It was fate that made the difference. It's true even of Narasimha Rao, though we don't actually realize this. In 1991, Narasimha Rao did not stand for election. He started packing up his house. He said he was unwell. He wanted to return to his home in Andhra Pradesh. And half his stuff was already on its way to his retirement home when Rajiv Gandhi, who was then Congress president, was assassinated. With a vacuum at the top, the Congress looked around for a new leader, and therefore, because it had won the election or was forming the government at any rate, a new prime minister. Narasimha Rao got the job because he was considered harmless, not a threat to anyone. There were no real negatives. And this old man, or so we thought, who was ready to give up and to retire, suddenly became Prime Minister of India. And in those 5 years, he transformed India. So much for its ill health. When he was Prime Minister, the Viagra or the vitamin of power so energized him that you forgot that he'd been on the verge of retirement. And in fact, when he lost the prime ministership, things went badly. He fell ill again and died soon afterwards. It was fate that made him prime minister, and it was fate that helped transform India with the economic reforms and with liberalization. There are many such examples of the prime ministership of people who became prime ministers owing their positions to fate. Let's take some of the obvious ones. Now, we know that the Congress in the last years of the 1990s and the early years of this century was beset with many tragedies. Rajesh Pilot died in an accident, Jitendra Prasad died young. These were all great leaders who would have definitely made a difference if the Congress had come to power. Except in those days, we thought, the Congress is washed up, it'll never come to power. And we thought Sonia Gandhi, who'd just taken over, I think, in 98 as Congress president, would in any case be the prime minister in the unlikely event of the Congress coming to power. In fact, the Congress did come to power, and Sonia Gandhi turned down the prime ministership. Who would she have chosen? Well, she chose Manmohan, we know that, Manmohan Singh. But there was a choice, right? Until he died in 2001, Madhav Rao Sindhya was in many ways her favored candidate. After she'd taken over as Congress president, a lot of people, a lot of senior leaders in the Congress said, you can't have a foreigner leading our party, or this lady doesn't have the experience. Sharad Pawar and Sangma and various people left and formed their own party, Nationalist Congress Party, of which Ajit Pawar later became a member. But there were very few congressmen who stayed loyal to her. Madhav Rao Sindhya, who'd known her before she joined politics, was one of them. She trusted him, she relied on him. He was always completely loyal. He supported her against all the splits and the dissenters, everyone. He couldn't become prime minister, even if she'd actually wanted to make him prime minister, because in 2001 he died in an air crash, suddenly and young, at the age of 56. Would Sonia have made him prime minister? We don't know. There's a view that says she wanted somebody without a political base, and Manmohan Singh was ideal. I personally don't think that. I think Madhav Rao Sindhya could well have become prime minister. And what kind of prime minister would he have been? Well, very different from Manmohan Singh, because he was a charismatic North Indian leader who'd never lost an election in his life. He would have concentrated on rebuilding the Congress in North India. He would not have sort of sat back and let it collapse. And in the last years of UPA 2, you will remember when things fell apart and when Manmohan Singh retreated into sort of frightened silence and there was no sense of visible leadership. That wouldn't have happened. He may have been right, he may have been wrong, but Sindhya was always decisive. There would have been decisive leadership. The vacuum that was created in the last years of Manmohan Singh, when Sonia Gandhi was unwell and Manmohan was unavailable, which led directly or indirectly to the rise of Narendra Modi and his style of leadership, would not have existed. If it had not existed, if there had been no vacuum, if the Congress had seemed like it had a leader at the helm of affairs, would things have been different? I think they would have been. But I guess we'll never know. It's fate. There are more what ifs. Most of us are now not young enough to remember how Atal Bihari Vajpayee became leader of the BJP. In our minds, he was always a leader. Advani was always his sidekick. And there was no doubt that if the BJP came to power, Vajpayee would have been prime minister, as he was eventually. But in fact, it's not so simple. The leader of the Jan Sangh, which later became the BJP in the 1960s, the party president, was a man called Deen Dayal Upadhyay. Deen Dayal is now largely forgotten outside of the Sangh Parivar, but he was a significant leader. He had his own philosophy, which he wrote about, which the Jan Sangh accepted, which became its philosophy, which also is now forgotten. Hardly anyone speaks about it. I heard Shashi Tharoor talking about it the other day, and Shashi Tharoor, who ideologically is on a completely different side from the Jan Sangh, said how impressed he was by what Deen Dayal had said. If the Jan Sangh, which became the BJP, had ever come to power, the chances are Deen Dayal would have been our prime minister. In 1968, I think it was, on a train on the Lucknow-Patna sector, Deen Dayal was found missing from his compartment. They looked, they found his body by the tracks. Somebody had entered his compartment at night, killed him, and thrown his body out. The CBI concluded it was robbers, and the case was closed. His family was never satisfied with the explanation. They complained later. But the fact is, Deen Dayal was out. And once he was out, who took over? Vajpayee. And that was the beginning of the Vajpayee era, and that was what made Vajpayee prime minister eventually. Could it have been different? Yes. If Deen Dayal had not taken that train, if robbers had not entered his compartment, there may have been no Vajpayee era. If there had been no Vajpayee era, there would have been a Deen Dayal era. It would have been very different. But I think the biggest what if in Indian history, or in recent Indian political history at any rate, is what would have happened if Sanjay Gandhi had lived. You may remember Sanjay Gandhi. Now, Indira Gandhi had two sons. The older one was Rajiv. He was a pilot with Indian Airlines. He had no interest in politics. The younger one was Sanjay, who was a bit of a hothead, who was not academically any good, never really held down any job. He was a bit of a motor mechanic. The government gave him a contract to make a small car. Nothing really came of that small car, but he was still fascinated by cars. In 1975, when Indira Gandhi was at her lowest ebb, she'd even lost an election case and had been asked to leave parliament. She panicked. It's not clear whether it was Sanjay who told her to do it, though a lot of evidence suggests it was. But she then declared an emergency. She locked up the opposition, censored the press, and stayed on for 2 more years. During that period, whether or not Sanjay was the architect of the emergency, there is no doubt he was his primary beneficiary. Despite no political background, and as far as we can tell, no interest in politics, he suddenly jumped into the fray. He became the most powerful person in India. He threw out many of Mrs. Gandhi's old ministers, some of whom were her friends. He spoke badly to them, rudely to them. Mrs. Gandhi always took his side against those ministers. Sanjay was hailed by the then censored media and the then supine media. Yes, we had supine media even in those days, as being the great youth leader. He, in many ways, we say later, was what went wrong with the emergency because he introduced policies like mass sterilization, which led to Mrs. Gandhi's defeat in 1977. But even when Mrs. Gandhi was down and out, Sanjay continued to be powerful. He'd announced in 77 that he was leaving politics, but he never really left. He was the architect of Congress strategy. And in 1980, when the Congress came back to power after a brief spell in the wilderness, it was Sanjay who called the shots. Sanjay who decided who would be in the cabinet. Sanjay who ministers would go to. Now, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but he was, I mean, let's be honest, a thug. He was not the kind of man who should ever have been in that kind of position. And yet, that was where India was. One fine day in 1980, a few months after Mrs. Gandhi and the Congress had returned to power, Sanjay went out flying on a Pitts stunt aircraft. This is an aircraft that, does all those somersaults in the air and all those stunts. It's a dangerous activity, and you're usually encouraged to do it far away from any habited area, supposing it crashes or whatever. Sanjay, of course, paid no attention. He did it right in the center of Delhi, in the center of Lachlan's Delhi, high above in the sky. If you looked up, there was Sanjay doing somersaults. The inevitable happened. Sadly, the plane crashed. Sanjay died. He had died as he lived, recklessly, dangerously, endangering the lives of innocent people. But he was out. Once he was out, everything changed. Mrs. Gandhi turned against Sanjay's people. She threw out his widow from the house. She promoted Rajiv, her second son, who was reluctant to join politics, but she made him join politics anyway. And memories of Sanjay were erased. Now I keep wondering, supposing Sanjay had lived, supposing he hadn't gone on that Pitts aircraft, what kind of India would we live in? All that we know about him, that he was authoritarian, that he wanted a cult of personality. There's some evidence that he was communal. He's supposed to have told the residents of Turkman Gate, whose homes had been demolished, you people will create a mini Pakistan in India. I don't know if that's true, but certainly there was this view that he was not of the same secular bent of mind as his mother. If all of that was true, if Sanjay had continued to rule India, where would we be today? Would we still be a democracy of some sort? I don't know. That's another of those great what ifs of Indian politics. So when you talk about the Ajit Pawar tragedy, I feel bad for him. It is a real tragedy. I think we have to be sad. But we also have to realize that at the end of the day, politicians plot, they scheme, we make suggestions, they ignore our analysis, they go ahead, they outwit us all, they betray each other. But none of it matters. because we don't decide. Somebody up there decides who lives and who dies.